Infertility is like being single on Valentine's Day, 365 days a year. I mean, babies are everywhere. They're bouncing, they're babbling, they're dropping their binkies. The other day I walked by a bouncing baby on the dock at the mill in downtown Lincoln, and my heart filled with joy. And yet at the same time, I thought of how that same sight would have saddened me, perhaps ruined part or all of my day before my daughter came along. And I thought about how some single people must feel seeing kissing, caressing, cuddling couples all Valentine's Day long, perhaps all year long. You see, my wife and I are infertile, but we pushed past it through some heroic applications of technology to get pregnant after 4 long years of constant struggle and heartache. And often that heartache would come at the coffee shop, at the store, on the street corner. Everywhere, babies were bouncing, babbling, and dropping their binkies. The thing about it is that the pain of my infertility doesn't show up, quite so often. It doesn't lead to the crying fits and panic attacks that used to happen at stores like Target and Indigo Bridge and IKEA. But there remains this dull ache, this shadow grief that I'm only just beginning to understand. And I would feel this dull ache at my favorite bookstore, Indigo Bridge, in downtown Lincoln. So Indigo Bridge has this wonderful children's reading room, and in the middle there's this whimsical tree that stretches from floor to ceiling, and it's made of cloth, and when you see it, you can imagine you're in an enchanted forest. When I would see it, I would imagine a chair, and me sitting in it, my daughter in my lap, and a new book always close at hand. And she would say, "Daddy, Daddy, can we buy this book?" And I would say, "Yes, of course we can, sweetie," because I've had plenty of time to think about my daddy policies, what I'll say when she asks for this or that. And I've decided that my answer to books will always be yes. Now, if you want some plastic toy other than Legos, well, then go ask your mother. And speaking of her mother, she has a number of challenging health conditions that have made getting pregnant really difficult for us. So polycystic ovaries, uterine fibroids, a tumor on her pituitary gland. I, on the other hand, have slightly slow sperm. The little boys just can't seem to get motivated sometimes. And yet, despite this disparity in our health conditions, she's not infertile, I'm not infertile. We're a pair, the two of us. We're one flesh. We are infertile. And it's a condition that we share with 1 out of 7 Americans. 1 out of 7, think about that. Look around. 1 of 7 people in this room may be struggling with this deep desire for something they cannot have and maybe never will. My wife and I are blessed as well to be among the much smaller percentage of people who have the financial resources to buy infertility treatments. $12K for the first IVF procedure. We're up to $50,000 we've spent total so far. Forecasting that we were going to spend a whole chunk of change on our babies, we wanted to try the free love and 5 minutes approach, or as close thereto as possible, that 6/7 of the population takes for granted. So we started, as most infertile couples do, with Clomid, a widely available, inexpensive hormone supplement that, in our experience with our friends struggling to get pregnant, got most of them pregnant, but not us. So we had to move on to what is formally called intrauterine insemination, and what I like to call the turkey baster method. Now, at this point, things get a little uncomfortable for me because I have to tell you about the black vinyl couch and Corvettes. So the black vinyl couch symbolizes how infertility has robbed me and my wife of the intimacy that is supposed to be involved in making children. You see, my wife and I had a lot of sex when we were first trying to get pregnant, but in order to produce our daughter, I had a series of appointments with a black vinyl couch. Tightly scheduled because the room was reserved every 30 minutes. And so we had to keep things going here. And in that rather dispiriting room, I would be more angry than anything. And I was angry at Corvettes and Camaros because they symbolized for me this idea that some unlucky people get pregnant in the back of sports cars. And oh, how I longed to be so unlucky. Well, so fast forward through a number of stops and starts and counseling and pursuing domestic adoption and going to a mandatory 2-day training class taught by a woman who was 8 months pregnant at the time. And we got to the point where we decided on IVF, and the procedure went amazingly. I mean, we harvested way more eggs than we possibly could have prayed for. Way more of them turned into healthy embryos than we possibly could have prayed for. The implantation went great. And then 2 days before we were supposed to check for pregnancy, Jamie's gallbladder exploded. And we'll never know what happened to that pregnancy. Fast forward through more stops and starts, trying international adoption, and having a close friend of ours offer to serve as a surrogate mother. And our doctor convinced us to try one more time with a frozen embryo transfer involving what I like to call my freezer tots. You stick them in the microwave on 50% power for 30 seconds, pop them in my wife, and poof, we're pregnant with our beautiful daughter, Lillian. And at about this time, as you hear about my experience and you know that 1 in 7 people in this room have had similar experiences, you might be wondering, wow, have I ever been insensitive to an infertile person? You might be thinking, have I ever taken my ability to have children on demand for granted? Have I ever said to an infertile person, you want kids? Here, take mine. Well, I really bet that you have done or said something like that. And you know how I know? It's because I've been insensitive to infertile people. I once said to an infertile couple, friends of mine, wow, I bet you're glad you still get to sleep through the night. Well, no, they're not. They would give anything in the world to stay up with their child 7 nights in a row, or 70 times 7. And they still don't have their child, and I grieve for them, and I mourn for them, and I'm rapturous with joy around them because when I see my daughter, she consumes me, and the whole world fades away. And in those moments, I know that I've been insensitive to infertile people in ways I can't possibly begin to imagine. Well, these days, the grief of my infertility shows up less often, more irregularly, like an unwelcome house guest. And that unwelcome house guest showed up the other month in the parking lot of our infertility clinic. We had just been rapturous with joy as we heard our child's heartbeat, our second child's heartbeat, when suddenly my wife said, our baby died. one of them didn't make it. You see, we had again been blessed to have 2 healthy freezer tots, well thawed. Everything was going great. And so we got this case of twin cravings. I mean, we wanted 2 more kids bad. And that's crazy to imagine given the energy it takes to chase one spirited youngster around the block and back and around the block again. But we wanted them, and one of them died. He died. She died. Does a shadow have a gender? So on the very day that I learned I'd been selected as a TEDxLincoln speaker, I read this quotation from the book Hannah Coulter by Wendell Berry. And Hannah writes that grief is not a force and has no power to hold. You only bear it. Love is what carries you, for it is always there, even in the dark, or most in the dark, but shining out at times like gold stitches in a piece of embroidery. People call me brave for talking about these things in public, but I'm not brave. I'm broken. My selfish hope is that if I just talk about this often enough, I'll learn to look on my daughter and see her, just her, not a shadow. Because, God be praised, I see my daughter 365 days a year. Thank you.